Hi, and welcome to this segment of the Women's Show on Civic Space TV. My name is Maria Alesi, and I will be your host. As we get into a really exciting conversation, like from the previous segment, we had my peers had a conversation on the history of the women's movement, the challenges that they've faced, and the contentious issues, the different contentious issues over the years. And to bring that conversation today together is a couple of brilliant women, some you've seen before, and we have an extra guest on the show, and we'll really be talking about moving forward. What are the opportunities? What are the trends that we are seeing, and also how can you as a person plug into the women's movement? So to join us today from the previous segments, we have Isabella Akiteng, who is our very able moderator. Bella, say hi to us nicely.
Hi, how are you?
Yes, and we have Racheal, who was also here from earlier.
All right, hello, and thank you for having me.
Yes, and we have Rebecca Adile Achom. Rebecca, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello everyone, my name is Achom Rebecca Adile. I am a politician but also a human rights activist.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So I'm going to start with you, Rebecca, because we said already this is just going to be a conversation, because first and foremost, the first trait about everyone on this group is that you somewhat qualify to be young. Somewhat, right?
I am actually young.
Some of you looks might be keeping you here, but okay, yes, and also because that's very important, because we must understand that the women's movement also is carried through generations, and to be able to have a conversation about the future is very important when you have people who are like sort of in the middle ground of the future, because as we're aware, most of Uganda's people are actually under 18 years of age, the biggest percentage of Ugandans. So Rebecca, over to you. You've said you're a politician, and there's lots of things that have happened in the last couple of months. We had a big general election. We had a speakership race that created a big divide in the women's movement. Okay, not so big, but there were very, very contentious discussions around that. We also have issues of the future of Uganda's political space, given everything, the violence that we experienced, what the election in itself looked like, the ability of women to participate in the election and not. So what are your thoughts on that? Generally, before we go into the specifics, what does space for women in politics in the here and now, but also future, look like?
I would want to think, thank you very much, Alesi. I would want to think the space is something we're still fighting for. It doesn't feel like it's readily available for us yet as women, and especially as young women. Like, if you're to also go around and see the conversation around, let's just look at this 11th parliament, the women who are entering into this parliament, you're going to see that, thank God that there are old guard women leaders who are now leaving space also for young. We're also hearing those who are claiming they're not coming back. But you still see that there's that gap in conversation. We come into a government where we've had the regime take on leadership for a long time. And so even in the mindset of our leaders, there's been that conversation of, I can still lead this country, I can still lead as a member of parliament of this state. And so you find that even our own women leaders are still holding on to power and rendering us weak and useless. And instead of us actually being useless, they're the ones actually not doing the work. So there's already that gap between that generation, the under 30 generation is my generation, the generation between 30 to 40, and the ones who are between 45 and 50, who are taking, actually 45 to 60, who are still in power and think they're doing effective leadership. And so you find that it in a way creates a fight within the women's movement. In many spaces, you'll see that the young women leaders are at loggerheads with the older women leaders. And this is also because we don't have a connection. Our struggles are different from their struggles. So you look at a young women leader, her first interest is she's going to fight for positions at the party structures. And there's already, I come from a political party, the FDC. And already there's the mindset is just continuing. Our women leaders never got into the structures and won. They went through affirmative action. Affirmative action was very important around that time. But now if you look at our time, we're really fighting for positions beyond. And so when you look at our political party structures, the fight is head on that they're thinking you're very aggressive. Oh, feminist. Now that's where the challenge comes with our political parties. The understanding of feminism and then politics, the diffusing of the two is becoming a problem. There's a way it's just challenging.
Yeah, so I just want to throw a spanner in the works there, like for all of us. So there's been a big argument about, especially in relation to politics, but also even in general life, that should in terms of feminist thinking and in terms of creating alternative leadership for thought leadership, but also practice for Uganda as a whole, should we even be encouraging women to get into these spaces that are deeply toxic, they are deeply patriarchal, they are consistently and continuously creating and dispensing violence against women? Like, what's the value of us throwing ourselves in there and dying in the process? Bella or Rachel, whoever wants to answer first.
So I think so. Here's the thing: throwing a woman or any human being, for that matter, into a toxic space is wrong on all levels. But we also know that historically, our struggles are there by default position, and so there are battles that must be fought. You cannot. There are certain battles we cannot run away from, because running away from them has disadvantages that outweigh those in the event that you stayed and fought them. I think that the thing to do within our context of toxic spaces is to ensure that if you're pushing women to go and fight within a space that is that violent towards them, it's important that they go into it in knowledge. Okay, that you tell someone you're going into political office, but these are the realities of political office. Sexual harassment is at its whole high in there. There's going to be a lot of monetization. There's going to be a lot of moral questions you're going to have to ask yourself every day. There are times the only options you're going to have are wrong options, and you still have to make a choice. I think it's important that the battles are fought, but they must be fought with a minimum acceptable amount of knowledge for whoever is going into them.
And you know, Isabella, I think the other thing is for us not to close the doors on the women whom we have thrown into the den. I think we as women, I know it's quite a big responsibility, we should build a strong support system and open up spaces for communication. In the earlier segment, I talked about keeping communication lines horizontally and vertically open. We need to be able to keep engaging these women, because many times, you know, we had this conversation, I'll name the names, we had this conversation about Nabila, how she was a very fiery young parliamentarian, and then somehow that fire was quenched in many ways by the time she left office. So we need to keep asking these women, what is the problem? Why have you lost the fire? Because the truth is, even us who are outside here, we know how the patriarchy can chew you up and spew you out. It drains you, and that's the word, it drains you. So how do we build a strong support system for our fellow women whom we send into the lion's den, so that we are able to hold them accountable, but also they know that they have a sisterhood which they can count on to be able to deliver on their mandates? I think that's one way we can.
And back to really just the discussion on sisterhood and accountability and holding space for people. So the women in Uganda, so the women's movement is not just civil society organizing, right? It's women in the church, and historically, women in the church were very key players at the beginning of the movement, but along the way, they've stepped back, and it might be for very many different reasons. But how then, you're talking about holding space and keeping communication vertical and horizontally alive. The question for me becomes, how then do you do this when we see that not just in politics, right? In social setup, in economic setup, that the movement doesn't hold enough power to hold these people accountable. Because you've seen what has happened, for example, in the political space, that when you're having a discussion on politics, you're having it against FDC as a party, you're having it against NRM as a party, you're having it against NUP as a party. That then where do you find yourselves in this particular space? But also even in the economic space, that the people who hold the access to business opportunities, like you're in conflict with a bigger structure, some of which we sometimes belong to it, because you come to a room and now we're having a debate on a party position vis-a-vis an ideological position for the interests of women. So how, and this is really for building the future movement, how do we harness all these different, because there are complexities, there's no silver bullet for this? How do we harness all of this to create a movement? Because we're trying to build something better.
Okay, you'd like to go
Yes,
first?
I want to start by, you just said building something together. I think it starts from one thing. Even when you go to political parties, even when you go to the women's movement, when you go to political parties and look at the women's league in these political parties, they have never actually convened and actually had a strong position. That many times when you look at the youth league, they're all over news. They're putting their agenda forward. When nomination fees were increased, the youth leagues of political parties made their stand. The women leaders were quiet. And that was in 2016. And now we get into this election, women were being... I think the only time I kind of felt the women's movement was getting a bit stronger. And it also could be because we have decided to let ourselves be entrenched within the ideas of our parties and not our ideals and our interests as women in this country. We have decided to die silently. That even in we're dying silently, we're in a coma. Because even right now you'd see that the youth league, the murders that have happened in the recent election, the disappearances, you find that the youth voice has come out more vocal and the women's voices has been quiet. Basically, one, because there has been that function within the women's movement that the women in political leadership at parliamentary level distance themselves from the women at local government. That you find, okay, at parliamentary we have the WOPA for women leaders. What about at local government? What is uniting these women together?
Ulga?
And yet everything happens there.
What does Ulga do?
It's for everyone. General happiness.
Government leader out there. And
so,
the majority are men.
Are men,
Yes.
And so there's nothing organizing these women together and strengthening them. But then also in these small structures, the politics inside, they have been infiltrated like UNSA. So the women's movement, there has been questions of infiltration by government. And so you find that there is no clear position that is to the interest of women, that when we are saying, oh, like this recently concluded speakership, I have not been a pro-Kadaga, not because I don't like her as a woman, but I would feel maybe my interest wouldn't have been with her as a woman standing at the helm, but maybe with someone of stronger leadership, even while we all agree on this table that Semuju, or maybe I am speaking for everyone, would have been a better candidate. I'm speaking as FDC. Speak for yourself. Speak for yourself. But everyone kept on saying, oh, he couldn't, he can't win. Why? Because we also, like you said, making the wrong decisions. Even the women movement is bent on making the wrong decisions, even when we know it's wrong.
That's a strong accusation there.
Right?
Even when it's wrong, we are bent on making that wrong decision.
The debate of wrong decision. Of course, everybody, like everyone here is trying to bite their tongue. But no, I entirely agree, right?
No,
Because
okay,
there's lots of contentions around the person of Kadaga, and no one is debating her contribution to the movement at some point. But also, like all of us, she's quite flawed, right? I think the bigger contentious issue that we should be discussing is 30 years later. 20 plus years later, we only have one person we can bring to the table.
Yeah.
Like the entire debate is, so we've been doing this work for 30 years, we've been saying we're giving leadership to women over the years, and this is really specifically about women in the civil society sector doing work around governance specifically. How is it possible that all these years later, we ended up with one option to pick from? Right? Because now, I remember there's somewhere where we're having a debate between which devil to choose. which part of hell is cooler. Like, I think that is the and that is a big question for us moving forward, especially as people who might be given the responsibility to lead sections of the movement moving ahead. And just to join the issue of Kadaga, along with the sexual offences bill. And on the sexual offences bill, we had a bit of a contention around who is the woman moving forward, because people celebrated the law and they were excited about it. But there was a whole other section of the movement that said, listen, what is this? Like, how did we end up here? So how are these contentions providing us an opportunity to build the movement, or alternatively to break it, right? Because sometimes we're overly obsessed with keeping something alive when it should actually be dead. Yes, Bella, I want you to start answering. Yes.
I was still musing over the answer. So one of the things that that the Kadaga contention, for example, brought to the table very blatantly is the heterogeneous nature of the women's movement. That you have very many varied voices in there. But also in the same breath, like Maria said, you have the sexual offences bill and then all these clauses and conversations happening around, for example, issues of consent, but then also issues of identity. And then on when the news came out that Parliament had passed the bill, we all belong to a certain space of women. And there was cheering, there was overwhelming cheering from a category of women. And then there was clear mourning from another category of women who are saying, but how can we even celebrate this bill? How do you celebrate a bill that alienates sections of women like the minorities? How do you celebrate a bill that attacks that is blatantly attacking sex workers? How do you how do you celebrate a bill that, even if it was attacking just one woman, how do you celebrate a bill that harms someone who calls themselves a woman? And so the other opportunity in even the contentions is the fact that even within this semblance of unity and kumbayaness within the women's movement, we have been forced to have the difficult conversations about the women that we always leave behind. Okay, it's a conversation on one privilege, because there are certain things in the bill that really celebrate the privileged woman. Okay, there are people in civil society organizations that celebrated the bill because of the amount of money and time that they had put into the bill. But then in the same breath, you're saying, okay, whereas this is the case, some of us work with the constituency that you have just left out, that they threw under the bus. And so there is an opportunity within that to say that, can we have an honest conversation around which woman the things we push for address, and as much as possible, can they seek to address the needs of all women and not just a select group of women? It's a complicated place to be, because one, it helps you or makes you question your value system as a woman, as a gender enthusiast, and if you are feminist, it makes you question your feminist values and principles. It makes you question your politics, and it's one of those things where you're forced to think about every response you make in regard to such contentious conversations. It's not a black and white affair within the women's movement. It's not. Yeah.
I appreciate that. For me particularly, one of the places where we always, I think, can I say misfire in our conversation on the women's movement, is we have got power and invested it in particular organizations and individuals, so they are the voice of the movement. So when they say nay, we say nay. When they say yay, we go with it. And I think this is where we need to go back and reflect. What is the women's movement? Because I remember that conversation on Kadaga, the back and forth. The other camp is like, no, we need a woman. At least if it's just for visibility. This is a family channel, yeah? If it's just for the sexual, just that we share the sexual reproductive organs, so be it. But we need someone with those female sexual organs there. And then there were people who were actually centering issues of accountability. There were people who were saying, yes, you say you have been building women's capacities to engage in politics. Just like Maria asked, why do we have one woman, who we think is eligible? So I think we need to come to a place where we each take back our power as individuals, as young women, because we also form a very substantive bloc. And we say, yes, Because we will never be, first of all, we will never have the same kind of thinking. Also, given the fact that we are from different backgrounds, we are of different ages, you know, we have different kinds of, you know, there is this saying that we are at the different levels of consciousness when it comes to, you know, what the patriarchy has, has, you know, the way it has, I'm looking for the word, the way the patriarchy has, you know, conditioned us. So many times, some people are still at, let's say, the primary level. They at the basic level. Yes, their feminism says we support opportunities for all women, but there is always a but. Then there are people who have progressed. They feel that we should have systemic changes. Yes, Kadaga is a woman, but in keeping her there, we are in a way taking away opportunities for young women to be able to break through to those positions.
But also aiding patriarchy.
Aiding patriarchy.
Yes.
Aiding patriarchy. And then this also leads me to the issue of us weaning ourselves from the godfathers, as we spoke about. Because, you know, many times it is such a dilemma. You have a woman whom you want to support because she has reproductive organs, but then
We'll have the debate on the reproductive organ, right? But but let's continue.
Yes, but then the fact is that she is also enabling a system that disenfranchises other women. So where do we strike the balance?
Draw the line.
Yes, where do we draw the line and say, no, I think this is a woman, but she is selfish. She is not fathering. And as a movement, I think we really need this. Earlier on, I spoke about us having core values. We should draw a line somewhere and say that if you are not inclusive, if you are not for, you know, not cosmetic sisterhood, but the real sisterhood, which holds sisters to account, then you cannot identify as, you know, as someone who is within the part of the women's movement. I think we need, that would also be a starting point. I do not remember where I started from.
That's why we have moderators. They will sort this
but
out.
I think we can pick from some of the things what I have said. We need to draw the line and, you know, draw up core values of we as a movement, what do we stand for? What a shame that we as women, we can celebrate a bill, or the passing of, a bill, which is targeting, which criminalizes a livelihood of other women. What are we really a movement? Where is the sisterhood? Yes, you might not approve of what they do, but the very fact, I think at the end of the day, what should preoccupy our minds is the rights, the dignity, the recognition of other women as, you know, equals, you know, and that's why they accuse us of elitism.
But also, I and Maria always have this conversation, especially when the conversation around sex work comes up, because yes, it's one of the contentious points within the movement. But I think we've reached a point where one of the questions we ask as a default question is, okay, you have a problem with sex work, but have you questioned the system that made sex work an option, or even the only option on this woman's table to pick from?
But you see, but Bella, even if it's not, because so in defending or protecting like sex work or all these contentious issues, right? There's always that need to try to explain why people end up in this. But if I choose it, I must be allowed to choose it without being put in a place where now I have to go through some psych evaluation or something, right? Yes, because there are people who wake up and choose sex work as work, right? But the big debate is we're not having a debate on the choices that this person is making. Consciously, right? If they get into it consciously and they are completely, we're not discussing sex exploitation, we're not discussing, no, that's not what we're discussing, right? That even if I did make that choice, that I must be protected, that I cannot wake up and be arrested for doing something that is completely it's a consented to relationship, right? That in whatever law it is that we decide to make as women, we must seek, because So that law is very problematic, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it first of all, it attacks the women we've pushed to the margins.
Yeah.
Then it gets them and pushes them to the margins. Because it says that, oh, now we're going to, sex workers must be arrested and sent to jail. Then they're sent to jail while we're busy saying, oh, sexual violence in prisons.
Yeah.
Like it's... and then tomorrow we're talking about protecting women and every other thing. So I know I interrupted you, Bella, and I just wanted to pick on the next part of the question. Seated here, of course, in itself, there's a problem with who we are seated here, right? Because we are all heterosexual identifying women who belong to a certain social class.
How are you sure?
No, at least out openly, right? Out openly. Yes, so, and that creates a certain amount of exclusivity in the club. And I guess that has also created the problem that Racheal was talking about, who becomes the voice of the movement, because the voice of the movement, I remember, I think Solomon Nakawesi said it really, really accurately when she said, we put these people in our proposals and then we don't want to hear their voices, like we silence them along the way. Yes.
Something very common in the political space as
Ah,
well.
so she said something very common in the political space.
That same minority voice will vote you into parliament.
Yes.
Will man your campaign, will actually sleep with your opponent, and you'll win an election, and then pass a law that may silence. So there is a conflict of interest in our country that says, do I make the choice that the people want to hear, the self-righteous people, or I'm using this because I don't know if I should even be using this as a politician. These words could be used against me in future. But also because we have one problem is, as a country, we want to be so self-righteous. We want to be God.
Hypocritical country.
We want to be gods of our country.
We have to
And
remind you
so-
that for God and our country, please.
So we keep on saying for God and our country. The president officiated the book of launch, or the Bible of the God who died. So are we for God and our country?
that man.
Yes, there was also that man who died.
You guys better be
We've
laughing at other people's beliefs.
had heads of we have
no,
heads of bodies going to parliament, and so we are for God and our country. And so I keep on questioning: are we really that righteous? Our leaders
we?
that righteous?
No, they aren't.
And so it
But
comes.
also our righteousness is selective. There are some who are condemned to damnation, and some their sins are forgiven. But please, carry on.
Some people, your sins are not forgivable. Yes?
Yeah, and so yes, some sins are not forgivable, but still it comes back to one thing. Maybe we just need to start understanding. We've not yet sat at that point as Uganda and realized as Uganda, what is the Ugandan dream? What do we really want for our people? The Americans have the American dream, but what do we want for the Ugandans? Except to keep on saying, for God and our country. I want a good Uganda. I want a Uganda where everyone is this. But have we really sat down and put the 4-point agenda? What does Uganda want?
So I think, yes.
We
I
have a
think,
vision 40-40.
sorry for
that is a government's vision, which is nowhere happening. It's nowhere reaching anywhere. And so even the women's movement, have we ever sat down and said, okay, in 5 years we want to achieve this?
Yes, the women's movement has done that over the last 15 years.
Just
They
just
did.
out of curiosity, when you say they've done that,
There is
in the
writing
last
a
15
manifesto
years,
and saying this is what we
but
want to
who's
do.
writing the manifesto? Who's writing it for who? I think that's always the key question we must answer, right?
And even what is the
Because-
spirit behind
Yes.
the
The writing of the manifesto.
Yes.
Because many times, I'm so sorry, and this it's not, it's not a blanket kind of accusation. But the truth is that we are many times just trying to appease the people who give us. One time I think it's Isabella who wrote about the enjoyization of the women's movement, if I remember right.
I'm not sure if it was me. I'll go and check.
It's you who shared it then. I think you shared it.
I
Yeah.
think you
But
shared-
okay,
no, she shared
someone
it,
wrote
yes.
about it, and I read through it. I am sorry if I'm attributing to you, which is not yours. Yes, and for me, I think this particular, we are this desperation to first of all stay relevant in a community where maybe the funding for women's rights is very limited, but also in a community that is obsessed with formalization of everything. Sometimes it limits, it makes us very, we are not natural, we are not naturally addressing the real issues that affect the women. We are addressing issues that have been dictated as important issues. So even the way we approach those issues, like let's say the women's manifesto, which I'm not, like watering down or anything, but even in such, let's say like such programs like the women's manifesto, we can maybe go back and ask how inclusive really are those issues in there. Because you said about the fact that we were silent. I'm part of the the women's organizations, that we were silent when Ugandans were crying about the current, political environment. And so what really informs our priorities? Who informs our priorities? I think that goes back to what we were discussing. What we're discussing.
Could I say we're now acknowledging our faults as women?
No, and that's why we need, because this is
that's
like
a journey to growth.
This is self-reflection. I love self-reflection personally, and sometimes I feel that we do not accept to be asked to account.
Yes.
Much as we ask other people to account, when it comes to ourselves sitting back and having honest.
Pull her down.
I love the fact that Isabella and Maria are such. They are. Yes, and that's the thing. Whenever we are trying to hold our fellow women to account, we are very fast to go on the defensive. But sometimes we need to sit back and listen.
But what did you do for us?
When the young women rise up and say, we feel oppressed within the movement, we feel our voices are not coming out, there is this, and they say we are entitled, we are selfish, And those are some of the things. I think actually I really appreciate this space. I'll say this again. So I hope that Sarah and the CCJ fraternity can make this also a space where we have those intergenerational conversations. You asked us about the future of the women's. We need it so pertinently. I don't know if that's the word, but we need those, intergenerational conversations, because the movement, as we talk right now, I'm talking about the former movement, is very fragmented. And we will not go forward when we do not address these internal conflicts. We are fragmented across organizations, do not work on women economic empowerment because so-and-so is already working on it. Do not work on peace and security because, we are struggling for the same funding, so you will somehow, deplete or yes. And then we also have those issues to do with the feminist strand and then the gender activists. And those are issues where we need to sit down. For me, I'll emphasize this. We need core values to sit them down on stone as a movement if we are to go forward. And if someone does not subscribe to those values, then maybe they can start their own movement.
And so the young people could start their own. Maybe their own feminist
That's why it
movement.
works like that.
But you see, which raises a very important question, because you're talking about core values and the sort of associations and forums where people come together, you ask to sign up. How then do we draw the line? Because it's easy to sit here as young women and forget that. I remember one time I called Bella when someone called me and said, "Oh, Maria, we're having a conversation and would like you, the older feminists, to come."
Oh my God.
You're not old. I said, "Father God, you are not old." My heart. Wow. So the point is, so when she said it, like at that moment I was like, yes, I was like, oh. But I also realized that this is someone who is in first year of campus, and her comment is very valid because she's seen me around for a very, very long time, right? And so her comment is valid. So we can sit here and be like, oh, the older people, whoever that is. And we will be these people. Yes. So the background of that story is really that we're talking about core values, and if you don't sign up to it, and then what. And then how do we ensure that in saying these things, we also don't recreate a gatekeeping system? Because the thing about signing up and what becomes I don't think your politics is good enough and then they're like, no, Bella and Achom have a problem together, and then it becomes a thing of I don't agree with Bella's politics, or Bella is not feminist enough, and creates that. Of course, part of the resource battle is really because of the capitalist nature of the NGO, and we find ourselves in that pool, though I think we can also reject it if we think about it critically. But so how do we avoid gatekeeping situations in politics?
But Maria, if I may interject, why is gatekeeping a bad thing? Because let's say the feminist movement has core values, and if you do not subscribe to those values, you are not feminist. I think that we've been talking about drawing the line. That line matters. It's uncomfortable.
Is a gatekeeping?
It has to be drawn.
I just want to pause and bring something on board. We're talking feminist gatekeeping, and we're forgetting even in the women's movement, there are feminists and the people who just call themselves women. They don't subscribe to the patriarchy. They don't subscribe to feminist ideals.
And those are the core values.
And they're in their movement.
Those are the core values, Adile, that I'm talking about. Because we know that if you are to call yourself feminist, then you must be dedicating your efforts, or you must be committed to fighting the patriarchy and the systemic, structures that it builds, or to disenfranchise people who are marginalized than the women. Yes. So that is a core value in my opinion. So we will say now that if you are the kind who says, yes, I believe that in women and in the equality between women and men, but only the equality of heterosexual women and men, the other women. So you realize where I'm coming from. We need sometimes to gatekeep. It sounds like a very negative word, but in my opinion, because this gatekeeping does not mean that we keep people from joining the movement from wherever they are, as long as they subscribe to those core values.
Yes.
They can then
I guess the other question becomes really on that, because we say, no, we must see you ensuring that you're fighting the patriarchy. But there are women who just want to live their lives, right? They are not on any day of the week trying to support the patriarchy or get into some activist mode, again, which makes us rethink the concept of the movement in itself, right?
Maria, is okay.
Yes,
I think the key thing is to hold those values dear to heart. Because for me, at the end of the day, the key thing is do no harm. I think that's maybe where I'll take it. Do no harm. If you want to stay silent as a feminist, do no harm to the other people. Yes, in your silence. Do no harm to the movement. Do no harm to the women whom you might think maybe do not merit those rights. You might do nothing, but in your doing nothing.
Because also, and just to add to what, I'm not sure if I'm adding, but but anyway, but it's also to say that again, from the very beginning of the show, we kept saying that women are not a homogeneous group.
Yeah.
We bring into the movement the baggage of where we were raised, how we were raised, to whom, all the inadequacies, the additions, our privilege. We bring all that, okay? And so by default, it's impossible to have everyone in the movement have a linear line of thought. It's impossible.
That's true.
It's
That's
impossible.
True. I agree.
But I think one of the values that we can have in the movement is one of respect. Mutual respect.
Mutual respect.
That you're going. If Maria decides to go on the street, I am not going to be the person who goes on national television to say it was wrong for Maria to go on the street, because it was a choice that she made in full knowledge, and she went to the street. That is how she contributes to this movement, And also, it is also to say that, because again, I know that one of the contentious conversations, especially when it comes to power dynamics, for example, is the issue of kneeling down. That when you kneel, you're ceding power. But it's also to say that the truth of the matter is that because we are at different levels on this journey, there are people who will happily kneel even for the air, okay? But it's also okay for you to say that this is the problem I have with kneeling, but I respect your choice to continue kneeling, okay? And in the same breath, you ought to respect me for not choosing to kneel. So I think the aspect of mutual respect in terms of the choices that people make within the movement, for as long as it contributes to the greater goal, is what should stand.
I'm sorry, I do not mean to be a very controversial figure here, but
You
you know,
already are.
When we saw you, we knew you.
you know, like for me, even the issue, I think I speak, even the issue of mutual respect should be subject to some, you know, for every key rule there are what?
Exceptions.
There are exceptions. So some exceptions, because I'm not obligated to respect someone whose actions in a way fail the advancement of the goals of the women's movement or of the feminist movement. I think in all that we do at the, for me anyway, we need the values at the end of the day. The mutual respect will be there, but this mutual respect should not enable us to continue in
Yes.
our subconscious, paying subconscious allegiance to the patriarchy.
But also, I think there's a difference between mutual respect and respectability. I think those are two different concepts that we tend to.
I think what is killing us as the movement is one thing. We want everyone to be there. The whole conversation you're giving me is expecting that. Whether we agree or disagree, the respect has to be on point, that you be there. Now, in movement building, I would speak differently. Me, I didn't come
I
to
like
fight.
your violence, darling. I like this version of violence.
I
This is
didn't
the
come to
violence we
fight.
must choose. Uh-huh.
I just want to,
we are
I'm
having a
speaking my mind
conversation,
now
and I
as,
appreciate
from
that.
movement. Now from movement building, I want to speak on perspective. It's like a road. We keep on saying this when you're doing the trainings and everything. It's a road. The movement is like us all driving our cars on a road. We're on a destination. My sister, if you don't agree with us, walk out.
Get off the bus.
When you find and agree with us, we shall find you at the destination. So let us just continue this
I think
journey.
we are agreeing.
These are the values that you're talking
no.
about.
Yeah.
And so I also want to say that there's where someone, when they're disrespecting us, we need to disrespect them back.
There we go.
If they go into the mud, we find them in the mud. We finish them there, and we come out and bathe and
You see,
continue.
we have fought a very humble fight for so long as
Yes.
the women's movement in this country, that we allow to be slapped, and then next time give this chin, and then give a woman leader that voice, and then she disrespects us back, and we're like giving the support again. I'm not going to mention that name, but that name has come out a
And
lot.
that's what we were
And
talking
so there's where we need to learn to slap back and say, damn, we are not giving it anymore to you. And so in this conversation, I'm taking us bit back to the politics of speakership. And so everyone was like, Rebecca, and my party had a position, but I was like, I think we can now for long give away the speakership to someone. And I would support a less candidate for that. But then maybe our deputy, I'll take an aggressive woman who I know I will slap back at some point. And so we've had a conversation as the women's movement thinking we have lost, but we haven't. We actually have a woman at speakership, but we haven't just centered this conversation on how we grow her and bring her into our space. And so many times as the women's movement, we are so bent on what we already have and not catch up on new spaces and new people that we bring on board. So when I look at, we've cried as the women's movement at how Amoding has lost.
Kadaga.
Yes.
And we haven't thought of who are the new fish we can start bringing on table before they have already infiltrated.
And I think
In civil society, we're looking at the church. We keep on being happy with the people we already know and not look at the people we don't know who are in these spaces. So when I'm a young feminist, so this week I was actually having a conversation with someone and saying, I think we need to start a counter women's movement against that women's movement we all know. And I was thinking young women. And yes, this is a honest conversation I had with a young feminist. And she was like, yes, we actually need, because every time I hear a struggle, when they hear a name, they're like, this honorable this, everyone's ears are up, like they've had a god, a woman goddess has arrived. And yet there could also be an issue of a younger woman who could also be in that space, but it's never taken out lightly. So I feel for every journey we go in the women's movement, we actually need a counter to actually keep us in check. We don't need the patriarchy now to fight us, but I think as the women's movement, if we had a counter women's movement in a sense, that is actually there to do a balance and check of ourselves as the women's movement, it would be okay. We don't have anything.
A counter
balancing.
movement. Why not a movement within,
A movement that has accountability.
Inside
that
the
one.
movement.
Yeah,
So
within.
what I hear from what all of you are saying is that for us to be able to move this, to be able to grow the movement or to create something new and better that serves all women, is that the priority of everything that we do must be accountability at all times. Because what usually happens, and that's why I asked the question of gatekeeping, right? Because what happens is, so we think Adile has done a really, really great job, and I celebrate all the women who've contributed to making this country what it is. But some of them hold us at ransom without realizing they weren't doing this work for free. You either applied for a job as an ED, you got it as a job description, you accepted it, you ran for member of parliament, you're one of the most highly paid public persons in this country. Like, you're not doing this work for free. So you cannot come and tell us that, oh, I've been saving women, and you're not appreciating it. We're paying you a salary every month. It is okay. Calm down.
And some women have also raised that issue. I remember reading a report where the women parliamentarians, when asked why many times they do not identify with, women's issues, and they said, I was elected to represent a whole district, not to represent women. So I hear you. But then also I think we cannot hold to account someone with whom we've not built a relationship for them to feel answerable to us.
No, but you cannot, because you see that the
I'm
thing
meaning
is...
in terms of
but
the
you see- no, but
I'm meaning in
no.
terms of the movement,
But
of
we
the
are
women's
citizens,
movement.
and we pay
Yes.
taxes, and the taxes we
taxes is paying
pay
that person.
are benefiting you. Literally, I pay for the toothpaste in your house.
And the person can say, I have other priorities. So we are talking about the women leaders centering women's issues. Because yes, she has an obligation, but given also the environment in which she's operating, she has to self-preserve. So she will steer clear of some of the issues that we think are very contentious or very controversial. So I think it goes back to us deliberately building, building a relationship, with these leaders.
I'm not sure it's building the relationship with the leaders. I think it's about us investing in the movement so that the movement produces the leaders that we want. Because attempting to cause adults like that to join something that they've not been part of over a period of time is problematic in its own way. But then if you say we are going to build a very organic women's movement and ensure that it's robust, that it's active, by default, you will begin to have products from the system, from the women's movement system that understand, the things that you stand for, ending up in positions of authority. Until that time, we are going to have to grapple with that, with female leader versus feminist leader. It's a journey that we are still going to be with reproductive system.
And so it comes back to one thing. So you say building our own leaders. And so it comes back to one thing. We need to also decentralize the women's movement. I always want to see that the women's movement in Uganda is not rooted. That the woman, when you go to maybe deep in Kabale, and you ask her what's the women's movement, I don't know that. Is that an organization? She doesn't know by virtue that she's a woman, she belongs to a women's movement.
And we talked about that
That's
earlier.
a big contentious issue.
I was like, but it's very contentious. Not
No,
every
you're right,
woman.
but not right.
But at least recognize that there is a women's movement.
Yes.
And so you'd find that in this country, it's not even recognized.
The women's movement.
That the letters being sent, we're supposed to be at every formal engagement have a representative saying, yes, I am speaking on behalf of the women's movement, and power is accorded to you. And it's not there. And so it brings me back to I always get back to the politics because my conversation starts from there.
Yes.
That when I look at, I'm FDC, but when I look at the people power, I don't want to see NUP, I want to see people power. When I look at people power, it is owned because this structure, this person, was seen as someone rooted somewhere. I relate to this person. So do people relate with the women's movement? We don't.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Yes, no, that's very interesting because then maybe we can discuss the issue that Racheal raised earlier about priorities, about being able to feel that to be someone makes reference to it as, do we know what is being felt in the central nervous system of the lives of women? Because we come here, we say all these fancy things in English, but when push comes to shove, we are not part of the push comes to shove, because none of us on this panel is the average Ugandan woman. Not in any way, not economically, not politically, not in terms of your education, not in terms of social access. Even where we live really just points out that none of us is the average Ugandan woman. And so as we come to the end of this discussion, I just want us to give our parting shots in terms of what do you wish to see in the future for the women's movement? And of course, the conversations will continue because key things have been raised. The question of representative politics. Must we even run a system of representative politics where someone is representing people, and then the criteria for representation is not even a representation of the people in the society, right? Yes, so parting shots. I'll start with you, Adile.
So for me, my parting shot is the women's movement is okay. We just need to put some bones and sticks together and then frame it up. But I feel as women of Uganda, and as the young generation, I speak for the young generation, forgive me. I feel we're on a journey of growth, and at this state, it's good we are not dead.
Yeah, that's a very good one. It's good we're
Anything
not dead.
that is dead can't live, but it's good we are not dead. So let's just work on getting the medicines right.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Adile.
Okay, for me, I think I'll leave behind 3 recommendations. One of them is we should be very deliberate. I've used that word so many times. I need to enlarge my vocabulary. Yeah, but we need to invest in strategic movement building. As a movement, just like Adile said, she said, when you ask people at the community level if they know at least what the women's movement stands for, they do not. And it goes back to my belief that we cannot count on, a movement, or we cannot count on a critical mass that's non-existent. So we need to deliberately create it. We need to reach out to we talked about this in the first segment. We need to reach out to the young girls in schools. We need to go to the informal spaces and make women understand, first of all, what the women's movement is about. Just like though we started in a humble way, in the days of the Mothers Union, in the days of the Young Women Christian Association, mobilizing those people who are at the grassroots, we need to go back to those, values of bringing everyone to the table, investing in them, and from those we'll be able to build, the political, the political power that Isabella was speaking about. The other thing is, I feel that we need to build clarity on our core values. I'll stand by that, because we cannot really go far if we remain as a fluid kind of society, which is blown by and, formed by the political, winds and all that. For a very long time, we have relied on, tokenism to be able to run the movement. But now even the guarantees of the Constitution, we cannot rely upon them because it has been touched. Yes, so the Constitution has been touched. I think Sarah, I would have loved for Sarah to be here and talk about that. By 2005, I read that it had been touched more than 119 times. Wow. So imagine such a document which is in flux. It's continuously in flux. Can we rely on it? So we need to be able to build our core values which guide our work and which also establish a reliable kind of force at the grassroots without relying on the tokenism that comes from the powers that be. And finally, I think that was actually it was the same as the last one, which is we need to build clarity of a conceptual framework as the women's movement.
NGO language killing us.
To bring it in.
So my parting shots are really the same as the ones from the first segment, that for us to grow this thing and get more results from this thing that we call the women's movement, we must invest in growing it organically. That we cannot we cannot do log frames for the movement, you know, but also we cannot alienate certain groups and voices from the movement. That whereas structured NGOs are beautiful and they have a contribution they make towards the movement,
A significant
we
one.
must recognize the power of the people who do not necessarily fit within the description of the structured NGOs and bring them to this conversation as equals. You know, that even as because it's a shift in the programming.
Yeah.
That when if you're going to communities, you're not talking to people and saying you're our beneficiaries. You get with
Our
your
language is so
yes,
problematic.
with the beneficiaries, the marginalized people. You know, like
Voiceless.
our language does not build this movement
It
in
doesn't.
any way.
Yeah.
And so until the woman we call beneficiary is able to come and have an equal conversation in terms of power with us on a show like this, we still have a lot to do and a far distance to go with our movement building.
I do appreciate that.
Yes.
So thank you to our brilliant panelists. It's always nice to have conversations with all of you because I also know all of you personally. Yes, and thank you all our viewers for joining us this evening. The idea of this entire show is that we must be able to have all the difficult conversations on issues that affect women. And we must be able to create a platform where any woman is able to share the way they are experiencing life, they're experiencing this country, and generally experiencing the world at large. So until next time, thank you for joining us, and we wish you all the best.
Asante.
I'm going to do my peace sign.
Thank you.